Kia ora and welcome to Tower Sector Report. Recently we visited the inaugural Ag in Action event in the Waikato, where the latest and state-of-the-art machinery was on display for contractors and farmers. This raised a few questions for us. Just what are the challenges faced by contractors in their work with farmers? One issue is liability by farmers for problems which many think are the contractors, but which can end up in the farmer's lap. There's also the question of safety out in the paddock. Well, we speak with Roger Parton of the Rural Contractors Association about his views on these vital issues facing the industry. And what about the host of rules and regulations governing contractors and farmers moving heavy machinery about our rural roads? Find out more from the police officer who handles these issues in the Bay of Plenty and his transport agency counterpart about overwide and overweight vehicles. And Sector Report correspondent Drew Chappell investigates one product which keeps many truckies very busy: palm kernel. The supplementary feed is being brought into the country in ever-increasing record amounts, $230 million worth last year alone. But first, here's Rural Contractors Association Executive Director Roger Parton. Well, Roger, welcome to the Sector Report program here on Country 99 TV.
Good morning.
Morning. Now, just an overall look at the contracting industry to begin with. Over the last 2 or 3 years, things have been a bit tight for farmers. Has this had a ripple effect with contractors not getting enough business, or is the industry actually in pretty good health?
I think it's probably suffered the same as the farmers have. There's been 2 or 3 reasons. First, there's been the economic recession. There has been the amazing amount of different weather that we've had, some of it unseasonal. We've had droughts, then we've had floods. Which has made the planting very difficult to get in place, and the cropping periods have been reduced accordingly. So yes, they're feeling the pressures as well. One
big issue for contractors appears to be liability on the part of farmers. Can you explain what sort of liability you're talking about and the circumstances where it can become an issue between a farmer and a contractor?
I think there's a general perception that if you engage a contractor, you basically absolve yourself of all health and safety requirements and those sorts of things, which is not actually the case. If there is a really bad accident and the police and the Department of Labour investigate, then there may well be some responsibility sheeted home to the owner of the property, the farmer, if there is seen to be health and safety deficiencies. We haven't had any experience of this as yet, but the potential is still there, because you can't absolve yourself of those requirements. The other sorts of things that can happen is that if the contractor absconds, his employees may turn up on the door and ask to be paid because they haven't received any money, and it's coming from the farmer at the end of the day, and they may want their payment, as may the IRD.
And the farmer may, yes indeed, the IRD, the farmer's going to be responsible for the PAYE.
Well, the contractor is responsible for the PAYE of his staff, but if he has disappeared, then they may come knocking on his door, because that's where the money comes from in the final analysis.
Now, just looking at safety, I mean, agriculture does not have a good track record with accidents. What can go wrong for contractors? What are some of the horror cases you've come across over the years?
Well, I think the Department of Labour has got a file full of them, where people have got parts of their bodies caught in various pieces of machinery around the drive prop shafts and those sorts of things, falling out of tractors. You know, a whole number of things that can go wrong. You're talking about very large, complex pieces of machinery.
Exactly.
Now, contractors are using these all of the time, and therefore are probably more familiar with them. There is an old saying that familiarity breeds contempt, and you know, you think, I'll just clear that bit of blockage out of there and put your hand in, and you know, it's too late. Farmers may not be using that amount of equipment that often, and therefore may not be quite as familiar with it, so they may have a different safety problem. Certainly from what I have seen and read, there has been, the agricultural sector does not have a good safety record, and I know the government is keen to improve upon this, be it quad bikes, tractors or whatever. But you've also got to remember that they're operating in an environment which is hilly. It can be wet, it can slide. They're often on their own or with only 1 or 2. They may be out of cell phone coverage, so there's a whole number of factors which make life a bit more difficult for them than, say, somebody working in a manufacturing plant.
With this state-of-the-art modern equipment, which we've just seen at the Ag in Action thing, which we ran a program on, is there a greater level of safety, though, with this latest machinery?
I think the machines are improving all the time.
Right.
There's an awful lot of it now which is touchscreen electronic, where you don't have to get out and move things. You can just touch a button and the arms come down and what have you. But it's one of those things that the more complex it becomes, the more potential there is at some time along the line for something to go wrong.
Exactly.
And somebody gets out and has a play with it. And that is when the accidents can occur unless they've taken all the proper precautions and made sure that the guards are in place and the machinery is switched off and that type of thing.
Now, does your membership have a challenge, just while we're still on safety, with personal protection? Is there a tendency to ignore the need for earmuffs and protective glasses and so on when these guys are working on their own down in the back paddock?
There shouldn't be. I think you're probably referring a little bit to the Kiwi macho.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't need it. You know, the sun hat and the shorts and that's it. When in fact there should be helmets and earmuffs and eye protection and safety boots. I think they're becoming more aware of this, and certainly we're encouraging them to make sure that they have the personal protection available to their people, and also the high-vis vest as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Now, just looking at the commercial relationship between farmer and contractor, do you have anecdotal evidence of farmers squeezing contractors to get more out of them for the money they're paying?
I can probably hear my members shouting yes in the background at this point in time. But I think there is probably as much pressure on the contractors from the farmers as there is on probably any other area. But one of the things you have to remember is that you have contractors who have set up large businesses, invested in time and training, and they need to make a return on their money. If the farmer just accepts the lowest quote, because it is the lowest quote, there is no guarantee as to what that work is going to be like in terms of quality. And we have had instances where people have accepted the lower quote and after a year or 2 years have gone back to their original contractor and said, all I got was rubbish. And the old adage
Cowboys, basically.
Yeah, the old adage of you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Yeah,
exactly.
We have a registered contractor system which endeavours to give the farmer the confidence that their people are meeting their statutory obligations and they're qualified to do the work.
Do you encourage your members to have a written contract with a farmer before he begins the work?
Yes, we do. We provide one on our website for our members. The advantage of this is for both sides, both know what the terms are. The days of the gentleman's handshake, which was very nice, but it was very difficult to prove in court. If there is an argument, and sometimes these arguments can be about quite large sums of money. If you've got it in writing, both parties know this is the area to be harvested, this is what I want done, this is how I want it done, this is when I want it done, and this is what I want to pay for it. And if you've agreed to that, then you've got no argument.
And your members are availing themselves of these contracts?
Some of them are, yes, and some of them have got their own processes in place.
Right, of course. And also there's you mentioned the terms of trade document. Can you just very briefly tell me what that is?
We have a document that, again, our members can download when they're signing on a new customer. It records all the appropriate details, including emergency contacts, which may be necessary. And it just explains these are the terms of trade, this is when we expect to be paid, this is what happens if we don't get paid, and everybody knows what the rules are.
Well, a very interesting insight into the contracting industry. Thanks very much for your time today,
Thank you, John.
Roger Parton of the Rural Contractors Association there. We'll be back in a moment with a field report on the supplementary feed palm kernel, which keeps contractors very busy. Drew Chappell reports record amounts are being imported by dairy farmers. He investigates why palm kernel is such a hot topic for greenies.
In the shadow of the Great Mountain Taranaki, all around the New Plymouth region, trucks are on the move. $1,000 tonnes of supplementary feed goes out to Taranaki farms every day. Matamata-based J-Swap contractors are delivering palm kernel to happy farmers and hungry cows all around the North Island. spurred on by high dairy prices, the once small business is booming.
It's grown from one truck when I was here originally. From one truck we got 8.
John McDonald has been running J-Swab's operations in New Plymouth for 8 years and says in that time he's seen demand drive palm kernel imports higher and higher.
We're looking at our 5th boat this year, so you're looking at about 1.5 million tonne, isn't it? The last boatload we sold in 3 weeks. They just keep coming back, signing up. Yeah, it's just unreal, really.
Since the late 90s, the number of individual dairy farms in the country has actually decreased, but cattle numbers, milk payout, farm values and production have all increased. And with that growth, the need for feed has followed suit. That's been good news for the services sector as farmers try to get the most out of their pasture and supplement what they can't grow in dry years. In 1999, we brought just 400 tonnes of palm kernel in across the entire year. Now 12 years on and a single dairy farm would go through that amount in an average season. Incredibly this year already, 6 shipments of kernel have come in through our ports and it's only April. We're not finished yet. One of the biggest suppliers of palm kernel and other nutritional feeds is RD1. Operations Manager Mike Borry says while pasture-based farming sets us apart, the role of supplements in dairy businesses is soaring. What sort of volumes of supplement are we seeing coming into the country?
The majority of the imported feed is PKE, which is around about 1.3 million this calendar year. However, there's numerous other products that are brought in. There's biscuit meal, there's wheat, there's barley, to satisfy any shortage that's in the marketplace. I suppose you look at feed in the fact that there's fibre, there's protein and there's carbohydrate sources, and yeah, at different times of the year. In spring there's not as big a need for protein, that's probably more of a carbohydrate based feed, whereas in summer you're probably looking for, depending on what the season's like, a bulk feed to keep cows fed.
But while the grasses across the country may well be green at present, one of the world's leading climate and environment campaigners, Greenpeace, is painting a darker picture. The group has staged protests against palm kernel, which it says drives deforestation, bringing the issue to the door of the country's largest company, Fonterra. In the past, they've launched ad campaigns, staged sit-ins at Fonterra's headquarters, stopped shipments of PKE from coming into the country, and generally disrupted the whole business. Greenpeace's Simon Boxer says Fonterra should follow the lead of other companies who have looked to distance themselves from the palm oil industry.
This issue has been raised in New Zealand for many years now. Globally, it's becoming an issue. We know that many suppliers and distributors of New Zealand product are asking questions. We know that word is out. We can't hide this anymore. Fonterra is culpable for what's going on. It is linked intrinsically now, and they need to change course before they seriously damage New Zealand's dairy. Because if this really gets out in a big way, if you look at things like the carbon footprint of this substance, then actually it means that New Zealand could end up with one of the worst carbon footprints for its dairy products. And that's going to end in tears for not just New Zealand dairy, but all of our international clean and green reputation that New Zealand has. And that's too valuable to risk for making a quick buck.
What about the people who say it's merely a byproduct of the process, not a driver of deforestation?
We actually believe that that debate's now over. Everyone does accept that it is an integral part of the industry. It is boosting their profits. It's why they make a great deal of effort to segregate and process palm kernel. It's not a waste product. You go to Malaysia or Indonesia, you ask the palm industry, they clearly say it's not a waste product. It's one of the 3 main products from the palm industry. And so it's just simple as that. That argument's over. Fonterra has lost that, and I think it's really duty bound now on individual farmers to put pressure on the management of Fonterra to change strategy, change course before it's too late and this all ends in tears for New Zealand dairy.
Fonterra and other organisations which profit from PKE deny the links to deforestation, saying New Zealand's main kernel contractor in Southeast Asia, Wilmar International, is close to being certified as a sustainable producer. RD1 wasn't happy commenting on the environmental issues on the record, but most of those in the farming industry are of the same mind. Debates about the ethics of PKE aside, the fact is we're certainly leading the world in both the quantity imported and the quantity fed out to dairy cattle. Other countries which import large amounts of kernel use it on pig farms, as it's high in both protein and fibre. Mike Borry says it's too cheap and too useful to cast aside.
It has got a high fibre content and also high in protein. And I suppose the thing about PKE is that it provides a safe option for farmers when there is a shortage, and there's very few feeds that can offer that.
The chances of a major overhaul in the system are certainly slim. While the tankers keep bringing the feed in and taking the milk powder out, everyone in the industry seems content.
Everybody in the world is using it.
Yeah.
So I can't see they'll ever stop it.
Welcome back. Now we return to issues for contractors and farmers, this time from the point of view of those who must formulate the rules for moving machinery around our roads and those who police those rules. Gentlemen, welcome to Tower Sector Report. Now I have with me Sergeant Dennis Hogan on the right and Paul Chapman of the New Zealand Transport Agency on my left. Both are based in Tauranga and have kindly driven up here for this interview today. Now, Dennis, can we begin with the question of over-width vehicles on rural roads? Is this a policing issue for you?
Yes, it can be. There are a number of agricultural operators or contractors, farmers, that try to go the extra mile and make things look good. But like everything, there's always the odd person that tries to circumvent the legislation, take shortcuts.
What sort of shortcuts?
A lot of them aren't taking the time to appropriately mark their over-width vehicles, and so consequently you'll get, say, a couple out with their children, maybe a long weekend or on a afternoon or something along those lines, come across these things and not realise the width of them, or
how far they're going to have to go over to the other side of the road. And there's often not a lot of room for them to go off the road and drive along with one wheel on the verge, I guess. No,
there's not. And you know, the thing that we implore is that, you know, by using the appropriate signages on the vehicles, you know, the over-dimensional panels, at least it gives the average motorist who may only drive in the city or in a town area and don't really venture out into the country roads very often, and at least it gives them an indication as to the width of these machines and as I said before, the projections on them.
And Paul, some of these machines are getting monstrous. So we covered the Ag in Action event done in outside Hamilton just a few weeks ago, and I was staggered at the size of some of these machines that are being imported. What are the rules covering size? Is there a limit to how big a machine can get?
Some of the vehicles that are being imported at the moment are what we call over-dimensional. Some are not oversized, which means there's a gap somewhere between that they can fit into without breaching any of the requirements or having to provide pilots and move the vehicles with certain conditions and those sort of things. So what we're saying really is provided they identify those hazards, as Dennis said before, we're quite happy for those vehicles to be moving around. But it also applies to weight. Some of the vehicles are quite substantially overweight. Yeah,
I was going to get on to that in a second. I mean, yeah, we're looking at, I think Dennis mentioned to me yesterday, there are some tractors with tyres that are 2 metres high. I mean, that's just an indication of how big these things are getting. So that's becoming an increasing issue for you, is it, as a regulator?
It's just a matter of keeping an eye on it. At the moment, we've sort of, I suppose we've been overtaken by events. They've sort of appeared in the country over a small period of time, and our legislation hasn't kept pace with it. So we're actually currently reviewing all the policies at the moment and the legislation. With the aid of the industry. We're not doing this on our own because we believe the real technology and the input comes from the industry. So we're listening to those people, and perhaps something good will come out of it in terms of being able to move these vehicles on the road, but must be done safely, of course.
Absolutely, I was just going to say, it's all about safety at the end of the day, isn't it? Dennis, what sort of fines can be imposed in these cases of over-wide and over-long vehicles?
When you're looking at stuff under the mass dimension rule for signage and that sort of stuff, it normally be a $370 infringement fee for the actual offence. but it depends on what happens from there. If the lack of signage causes or contributes to a serious crash, we could be looking at further things from there.
Yeah.
So, although to some...
You could throw the book at them, in other words.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it's just a matter of the getting the right that counts.
Is the low speed of some of these machines a problem on rural roads?
Very much so.
Is it? Yeah.
Very much so. One of the problems, you might come around a corner, the average motorist coming around a corner, travelling at 100k, and partially around the corner comes across something moving along at 30 kilometres an hour. And those are the sorts of things that, you know, the operators of these machines need to take into consideration.
Right.
Is the other motorists on the road.
Exactly. And a lot of whom are townies, they're used to motorways, they're not used to having to queue behind a slow vehicle, so they'll get frustrated. And
they take risks.
And take risks.
People take risks, and you know, where those risks can be in a lot of ways alleviated by the operator of the tractor, where possible, pulling over to the left and letting that following traffic pass. And, yeah, that can be done easily in a number of places. You know, you've got intersections where they might be able to pull into another road briefly just to let that traffic pass.
Yeah.
Or you might have a wide shoulder on the road where they could pull over to the shoulder.
Exactly.
But one of the things that we don't want to see people doing is pulling over in a place where it's not safe for them to pull over. You know, the last thing we want to see is the driver of a tractor putting him and his machine or in danger on a soft shoulder. And
also stock trucks, I guess, would
fall
into that category.
Yes.
Now, what about overweight vehicles, Paul? Is that an issue for the NZTA?
Yes, it is. We have some real concerns about some of the vehicles, especially the harvester type vehicles where there's a lot of weight on perhaps the front axle, not the steering axle, but the front axle. They exceed the statutory weight limits by quite a considerable amount. But we do have a policy in place that assesses those vehicles based on what the manufacturer says they can carry on that particular axle. And then we assess it on the tyre size and other factors, and we actually come up with a ratio, if you like, or a vehicle axle index, which allows that vehicle to go over certain weights on certain routes. So it's route specific if they do get a permit. But what we've got to consider, and this is where perhaps some of the industry people don't realise, is that they say, oh, well, the footprint of a harvester vehicle is quite substantial, it's quite a bit bigger, therefore we're spreading the load more. Not quite so, because we have, you know, the treads, the lugs on the treads, which really much puts a lot of point loading on our bridges and culverts. And that's where our roading people get a little bit concerned about some of the damages can be done with these vehicles.
Well, I'm sure, they could do quite a bit of damage. There's also a problem, I gather, with farmers wanting to get maximum weight for stock being transported to the works. And there's a tendency for them not to stand the cattle or sheep off to get rid of their waste before they go on board the truck, so that they can, you know, get more for their animals, I guess, when they get to the works. Is that an issue?
From a policing point of view, yes, it can be. Because there's nothing worse than following along behind a stock truck and where the effluent tanks are overflowing, or on a wet day, and where the effluent tanks have a tendency to fill quicker than they normally would. The tanks overflow, following traffic gets covered in it, gets on windscreens, has a tendency to restrict visibility for motorists.
Yeah, it would.
And even motorists going in the opposite direction, and where a lot of those problems could be easily overcome by the farmer dry standing that stock, or standing that stock in an area where its food's not available, and they can empty out prior to being transported.
If I could just add to that too, our organisation at the moment is encouraging operators of the heavy motor vehicles, where possible, to take advantage of the new high productivity weight limits. And that can have will have a bearing. At the moment, it's pretty much route specific, as we said before. But
so the roads have got to be able to take a bit of a hammering.
But it also includes sizes, so you know we can actually have more stock on the vehicle, and just more economic use of heavy motor vehicles, basically, and that's what will be happening.
Well, interesting stuff, gentlemen, and thank you very much for driving up from Tauranga today for this interview. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thanks, John.
I was joined there by Sergeant Dennis Hogan of the Bay of Plenty Commercial Vehicles Investigation Unit and Paul Chapman, a transport officer for the NZTA in the same region. Paul pointed out to us that his agency is encouraged by the number of rural contractors and farmers who take a responsible approach to compliance. Well, that's our show. Remember, you can catch up with Tower Sector Report on our website. Look forward to seeing you again soon. Ka kite anō.